It is the Beaver Banter podcast. My name is CJ Baumgartner. Ian Rivers, my co-host. Ian, we're joined with Lucas of Beaver Territory, joining us for what feels like kind of your monthly check-in here, Lucas. How's it going?
It's going good. Just enjoying this nice mild winter that we're having. And, none of the ponds or anything have frozen over, so no one's getting any skating in outside, really. It's kind of just been a nice little, I don't know, brown Christmas that we're going to have here. So
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like the brown, like a wet Christmas almost. It's crazy. But Lucas, for those who don't know, why don't you introduce where you're from, kind of in your reporting over on Beaver Territory?
Sure. My name's Lucas Peipenhagen. I run a blog on Substack called Beaver Territory. You can find it at beaverterritory.substack.com. I write, some previews for upcoming series for the men's hockey team. Also keep track of a lot of the recruiting for both the men's and women's hockey team, and just try to provide as much data as I can regarding the teams. You can also follow me on Twitter at Beaver Territory or on Facebook at Beaver Territory.
Yeah, last time Lucas was here, CJ had some pretty nasty technical difficulties. So
yeah, do you think it noticed? Yeah, it was real bad.
We're hoping it goes a little better today.
It was only like a 30-second tape delay. What are you guys talking about? You're just so worried about me just going on a tirade on the podcast that you had to put me on a delay.
Yes, exactly.
But Lucas, as we kind of sit here now through the first part of the season with hockey, why don't we first just talk about that Bowling Green series? That's the last time Bemidji State men's hockey was on the ice. We mentioned this on last week's pod that we talked about, fancy that last year they struggled when they got hurt and kind of ran out of gas. And this year they struggled when they've been a little banged up, and they get their starting goaltender back, and all of a sudden they win 2 games in a row.
Yeah, I mean, they really started the weekend shorthanded, losing. Well, Casper Magnuson stayed around for the Thursday night game, but ended up going on international duty for Friday. Eric Polkamp's on international duty at the World Juniors. You have Liam Engstrom, who is unavailable this weekend, and obviously the guys that they've lost before that with Jackson Judding, and even throughout the weekend, you lose Carter Jones after Thursday, and then Leighton Rowe gets hurt on Friday in the third period. So, yeah, I mean, it was a really resilient effort. I usually think of coach speak of next man up kind of being cliche, but this team really, the guys that were in the lineup really rallied, really played well. They held Bowling Green to under 20 shots both games. I think Thursday was 18 shots and Friday was 19. So Matthias Scholl didn't see a lot of pucks, but he stopped the ones that he had to, and having him back there was just a huge benefit for this team.
Yeah, that was the main point that I think I brought up over the weekend. Was I don't remember the last time I've seen Bemidji State over the course of a weekend outshoot a team. I think it was 86-34 or something like that on the weekend. I think it was 16, if I remember correctly, on Thursday, and like 18 on Friday or something like that. That I said last week. Just incredible. I couldn't believe how well they played offensively as a unit, and especially after losing, this was a little bit of a nervous weekend because we thought we were going to be losing Polkamp, and Magnuson, like you said, was able to stick around for Thursday. Graciously, thank you to the country of Norway for that. But yeah, I was a little bit nervous going in because Bowling Green was coming off of a hot weekend against Ferris State. I think they had just swept them the weekend prior, and we looked very inconsistent against Lake Superior State. So I think a big 6 points when you look at it. And now, you had the week off and you'll play St. Cloud State. I don't think there's a better stretch of games that we could ask for having been a little bit banged up right now and missing these 2 players on international duty. Like we've kind of talked about, obviously you don't want to go in and lose both games to St. Cloud State. But if that happens, it doesn't change my outlook on the season as a whole. It doesn't really matter because it's not CCHA play. And like we've talked about, we're so far behind in pairwise right now that these games aren't really going to move the needle one way or the other. So I think it's kind of a good weekend to be a little bit banged up and have some guys missing if that's the case.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you always want to play in-state rivals tough, and I think the guys that are here are certainly going to do that. I mean, but there are just so many question marks about injuries, and I would expect Liam Engstrom back in the lineup, but if he's, again, you're going to be dressing everyone that we probably have available to you. Maybe you'll have one guy scratched, but yeah, I mean, whatever you can get out of the St. Cloud series, it's always nice. I mean, they're on the bubble of pairwise right now. I think they're 14th. So I mean, these games are huge for them. Like if they lose to Bemidji State, that's a pairwise bomb. Like that could be really bad for their outlook going forward. So they're going to be hyped up, ready to play. They are going to be at pretty much full strength from what I see, and they've been playing really good hockey. I mean, they're 7-0-1 in conference. I think they had a near perfect November. I know they lost and tied to Michigan when Michigan went up to the Herb Brooks Center. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough challenge. They're going to need to play, really structurally sound, really defensive again. Again, last weekend against Bowling Green was such a surprise that I suddenly have a lot more confidence in this team than I did, a week or two ago. So I think the games will be fun, but yeah, it'll be a battle all the way for them to get anything out of those games.
What I'm hearing is you guys are losing, I think, your hatred for St. Cloud State. I think is the thing, especially for you, Ian. I think you're going soft on me here.
I think we dominated them so much this fall and, so far this winter that I'm willing to give them hockey this year, because of the fact that we went 3-0 in soccer and we just beat them on a buzzer beater in men's hoops. We're giving this to them.
Don't forget the football. Oh, wait. Never mind.
You always got to bring that up.
You always, I mean, it's fun to pick on St. Cloud State fans for that. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, like you guys said, that series against St. Cloud State, not exactly the most important, other than just kind of pride and in-state stuff, and the fact that it's the only hockey game they have kind of over this holiday break. But when we jump back into CCHA play for Bemidji State, I guess maybe let's go backwards a little bit. Maybe that's the best way to do that. Lucas, through the first, I'm going to say half, just for all intents and purposes, of the college hockey season, what was your kind of outlook on Bemidji State, and what's kind of been their identity so far, and what do you want to see differently through the second half?
To say what their identity is really tough, because I don't know if they've really found an identity yet, and that's been a huge issue. Is just the inconsistency of play. They have had a couple of really stellar weekends against St. Thomas and against Bowling Green where they played, hockey more similar to what we expect from Bemidji State teams, really sound defensively, really, well structured. But the rest of the season has been kind of just back and forth. They suddenly show these offensive outbursts that teams in the past just haven't been able to do, scoring 6 goals unanswered against Michigan Tech, having that 3-goal comeback against Minnesota State. So when you're saying, what do I want to see from this team? It is consistency. And if they have that offensive component there and they're able to, score goals like they have so far in the first half of the season, that's great, but they do need to be better defensively on the back end. I think having Matthias Scholl back in net certainly helps with that. Having the confidence in the goaltender behind you is always nice for a defenseman. But they do just need to have better play out of their blue line as well.
I brought that up last week and I said, I don't know how much it actually resonated with the players, but it looked like a completely different team, even without guys that you normally see in the lineup. I mean, Jakub Lewandowski got a game when he's been a healthy scratch for quite a few weeks. And to his credit, he got a hell of an assist on Friday night. But, even with that jumble of a lineup that they kind of threw out there this weekend, it seemed like they just were more confident in front of Matthias Scholl. And I'm hoping that can stay consistent through the second half of this season, because the 2 weekends we've seen, obviously he didn't finish the game against St. Thomas on Friday night, but and then my guess is that, Gavin Enright was still feeding off of some of his energy on Saturday and was able to pitch a shutout in that game. And then, everything in between, when Scholl got hurt and when Scholl came back, was wildly inconsistent. So hopefully he brings some of that consistency back, because yeah, it wasn't pretty before he went down. You got peppered with shots against Wisconsin, but you were still somehow in that game. You took overtime to beat Army. And then I think the games against Duluth are a little bit misleading. I think it went a little bit better maybe than the scoreline says, at least. But hopefully having him back in net brings some of that consistency back. And I guess how much do you think that reigns true?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I thought, like you said, the Wisconsin game is kind of the outlier of the bunch right now. I mean, even with the 61 shots given up that game, Bemidji State's still top in the conference in terms of shots allowed per game. They're under like 27 shots allowed per game, which is it's pretty remarkable. The issue has just been their save percentage is, I think, now second worst in the nation, but for a long time there, it was the worst. And then again, that's not all on Gavin Enright. They certainly were giving up some high danger opportunities that, impacts that quite a bit. But, you know, it, having Matthias back there, like I said, I think you just see him making not just the routine saves, but he's going to make some, game saving saves now and then and going to win some games for you by himself. So just having him back there, again, I think just gives a lot of confidence to the guys. Like you said, the lineup in front of him was extremely jumbled. Both games this weekend, the guys really just rallied around him and played extremely well, and that was so awesome to see, especially against a Bowling Green team that was on a bit of a roll. Like you said, they had swept Ferris State, they had won 5 of their last 8. They had risen up the standings and were sitting, I think, 5th going into that weekend, and to get 6 points out of that when sweeps have been so rare in the CCHA this season, I feel like there's only been maybe 4 or 5 sweeps of for all the teams combined, maybe 6 or 7, but it's not a lot. And it's really rare to get a sweep in this league this year. So getting those 6 points is huge. You got to keep that momentum going. St. Cloud again is going to be tough, but Ferris State sitting there January 5th and 6th. And that's, for as jumbled as the CCHA is and for how much parity there is, Ferris is the one team that's not really in the conversation right now. They're sitting well in 8th, and that's, going to Ferris is tough, not knowing what your injury situation will be. But you still got to get at least, I would think, at least 5 points out of that weekend to feel good about yourselves going forward.
Yeah, with this team going into the second half of the season a year ago, me and Ian talked about it on the podcast a week ago of, there's a couple things that kind of echo from last year of a sweep to end on a Thursday, Friday series, your first place in the conference going into the new year. And then things really went south really fast for the last year's team. Could you see that happening again this year? Because injuries were a big reason for that, but they weren't the only reason. Is that possible? Or do you think that this is a team built to kind of ascend a little bit more than last year's when they kind of decrescendoed?
I like the attitude of this team better. I like the confidence that they're playing with. I like the resiliency I've seen so far in the first half of the season. The issue is it wasn't just last year. It was the year before that too, where they completely fell apart in January and February. I can't, if that happens again for a third time, that raises some serious question marks about, what's going on with the program, and how that's happening. But I just like what I've seen out of this group of guys so far this season. They just seem to have the right mental fortitude that I just can't see them completely falling apart like that. Every weekend is going to be a struggle. There's no doubt about that. And you're still playing. Of the 6 series you have left in conference, it's, you play Ferris State 4 times, and then you play the other top 3 teams in the CCHA once. You still play St. Thomas, Minnesota State, and Michigan Tech again. And then also Northern Michigan, who is, pretty underperforming so far, I'll say. So I think, it'll be a battle, but I just can't see them completely falling apart like they have in past seasons.
I think the inconsistency is the only thing that does worry me a little bit, is because, we are feeling really good right now because we just swept Bowling Green and we looked really good, but man, that could change. Like, we could go into Big Rapids and get 1 point, just like we did against Lake Superior State the last time we swept against St. Thomas. We were feeling really good, and then we go in and get 1 point from that weekend, and it's just, you start the cycle over again. And it's been, like you said, 2 years in a row now, and I think the main difference is, like, there was a sweep to end that 21-22 season, at St. Thomas, that kind of salvaged it and made you feel a little better. And then, of course, they made a postseason run. So you almost forgot about the skid that they took in the second half of that season. Last year, there was no redeeming quality wins at the end of that season. they split with St. Thomas to end the season. And unfortunately, if they would have swept, they would have been the 3 seed in the tournament last year. I think I keep saying that they were the 6th seed for some reason last year. They finished 5th in the standings.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm hoping that I do agree. I think this team has a different attitude, their resiliency. I cannot for the life of me shake the picture of Casper Magnuson scoring the goal to go ahead, or was it to tie or to go ahead of Michigan Tech in that game, that crazy one in the 3rd period.
Would have been the game tying goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So that the emotion that he showed and the bench showed during that celebration, that resonates with me to this day still, as I say that as it's like 10 years ago, it's like a month ago. But you know what I mean? Like I agree with that this team's emotion and the resiliency of this team, it feels a little bit different. And I'm hoping that that's something that they can use to kind of build towards the end of the season. And as traumatic as it might be to be here around Christmas time and see the Beavers in first place again and remember what happened last year, it's still better than being in 7th place right now and having to make up ground come the second half of the season. So I like where the team's at, and I don't know that there's necessarily one team that's like, where do you look on this schedule outside of St. Cloud State and say, I'm really terrified of this weekend? Almost any of these games is winnable. And I think that the struggle is going to be the last 2 weekends of the year. If it keeps trending like it is right now, at St. Thomas and at home against Minnesota State is probably 2 of the tougher teams you're going to have to play, especially because you just can't count Minnesota State out. I think that their pedigree is going to have them right there at the end of the year. And it could mean that you've got some very quality, maybe championship contending hockey towards the end of the year. Not going to say that too seriously quite yet, but it's something to keep an eye on as we get closer.
Yeah, for sure. And Michigan Tech has a couple of games on hand right now on everyone in the conference, and they'll actually have 4 games in hand after Bemidji plays Ferris. Their first series in conference play again will be against St. Thomas, so that'll be some pretty big games. I think the top 4 have kind of separated themselves now. I do think Bemidji, St. Thomas, Tech, and Minnesota State are kind of pulling away from the rest. I know Lake Superior is ahead of Mankato in the standings right now, but I think they have like 3 games on hand or 3 games more played on. So, the other thing too with this Bemidji State team is it's a really young and experienced team. So I do expect them to continue to grow and play better throughout the season. And also with the injuries, if you start getting some of those guys back, that could also be a huge boost to the team too. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the second half of the season. Every weekend's important. Every point that you can get is important. You need to get better in overtime. I mean, you're 1-4 in overtime right now, and luckily most of those have been, well, not luckily, but most of those have been out of conference. If you can start losing conference games in overtime, that helps getting those extra points. I mean, that's something Michigan Tech has done really well this season, and why they're leading the standings in points per game technically. Like I said, it's just going to be a battle every single weekend, and should be some fun hockey, and hopefully they're still in it at the end to make those last 2 series interesting.
Have we ever, when's the last time we've had the CCHA this kind of, maybe parody's the right word, but this close? Has it, I mean, even going back to the WCHA days, like, has there been a time where it felt like everybody is this kind of stacked on top of each other?
Not top to bottom. I can't think of a year top to bottom.
Right. Like right now, it's 1 through 7 are separated by 7 points. And of course, there's weird numbers of games in hand still. But like, yeah, last year was close in the fact that, I mean, Minnesota State and Michigan Tech were playing each other on the last weekend of the year to figure out who won the title. But that was just 1 and 2. Like, and it won't look like this. I'm sure it will not look like this come the last, weekend of February. But for us to be sitting here at Christmas time and to have it only be separated by 7 points between Bowling Green and Bemidji State right now is nuts. And I can't even think of any years off the top of my head where we've had like a a close race between like 3 or 4 teams come the end of the year for that number 1 seed.
Yeah, in any conference, I really can't think of. I mean, it's not just CCHA. I can't think of any hockey conference that's ever been quite like this at this time.
Yeah, it's been a weird situation. I've been trying to kind of think of it. And it's just part of what this conference is a lot of teams that are all kind of at that same level right now. And of course, it's going to be a one bid conference again, but Bemidji State, even with the way that they played early on, and I know you kind of touched on this already, Lucas, but they didn't play the best. They're very inconsistent. They had some games that they let get away from them, and yet at the end of the day, because of this conference being in the position it is, they're still in a spot to win the conference. And looking ahead, just is this a team that you feel comfortable with that towards the end of the season they can be, be in that mix to try and be at the top of the CCHA in the tournament?
I do. I mean, right now, every team in the CCHA is just, they have their own struggles. Everyone's got something that they're dealing with a lot. I mean, every team's inconsistent. It seems like no one's really put together more than a couple of games of good hockey in a row. I mean, Bowling Green winning 5 of 8 might have been the best stretch at all of any team in the CCHA for an 8-game stretch. So, whoever figures something out first is going to start pulling away. You got to hope Bemidji State's that team that kind of gets things going, right out of the break here and can maybe put some distance between themselves and other teams, or be in that group that does put some distance between themselves. So, yeah, I do think the schedule, like I said, 4 games against Ferris, I think that is going to be a benefit to Bemidji State that other teams don't have. A lot of teams are, Mankato, St. Thomas, and Tech have already played them once. So, the rest of the schedule is certainly difficult, but I don't see a reason why this team can't get at least splits out of every other weekend. So, I feel pretty confident that they'll at least be able to put themselves in a position at the end to be in the top 3. So, and hopefully still playing for the McNaughton come the end of or beginning of March.
Yeah, I think this is a year that it's as wide open as it's going to be. I mean, this is the opportunity you have to take advantage of. The 6-time reigning champion just lost their head coach in the offseason, and they're still not quite figured themselves out. And they still could, but it's another opportunity that you have a chance to take a hold of. And I think the last time we saw Minnesota State have a little bit of a down year was that 2016-17 season. Bemidji State was able to take advantage of that, and obviously they got off like a 13-game unbeaten streak or something like that in conference play. At least I don't believe they won an out-of-conference game that year, which was extremely frustrating, especially getting swept by Princeton on home ice. But yeah, they started extremely well in the conference, and it was just almost impossible for anybody to catch up to them. Hopefully they're the team that can put things together and be playing good hockey so that everybody else has to be extremely switched on. They're like, all right, this is our chance to get points off Bemidji State. And maybe that would be tough because you get the best version of every hockey team that you play. But I don't know. I think that we can absolutely see this team at this point when you're leading the conference, whether it's tight or not, midway through the season. Home ice is going to be like the bare minimum. You don't want to fall out of that position like you did last year. It would be a little less traumatizing this year just because we could be January 15th and we could probably be sitting in 5th place just because of how close the conference is. But it took a lot longer last year. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Ferris State, you've got to take the points off of them, especially even without, you're still going to be without Magnuson. You're still going to be without Polkamp. But like I said before, it's probably the best stretch of 6 games you can ask for to have those 2 players be missing and to be a little banged up at the same time.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And, it's been such a inconsistent season. Like you said, you can't go into that weekend just thinking the team's going to get a sweep on the road. I mean, they need to play, again, just well-structured hockey, and that's not something we've seen from this team a whole lot this season. We've gotten a couple of good weekends out of it, but they need to they need to keep that momentum going through the St. Cloud series and into that Ferris series for sure.
So for the CCHA as a whole, maybe let's kind of get your opinion on this, Lucas. What's been a team that surprised you so far this season, and what's been a team that surprised you, I should say, in a good way and surprised in a bad way?
Yeah, for whatever reason, Lake Superior State has our number. I mean, the amount of points that we drop to them is might hurt us at the end of the year. They really haven't been great outside of that series, or outside of games against Bemidji State, but they're still sitting mid-table, and I didn't expect them to be that high. Like, they had so many freshmen. I think they had 12 freshmen on the roster, most of them playing every weekend, that I really thought that they would probably be 7th or 8th in the conference. So to see them up there and competing for home ice, that's certainly a shocking surprise, a good surprise for them. Northern Michigan's probably been the biggest disappointment. I personally thought that they would win the league entering the season, just with the players that they had coming back and their recruiting class and their transfers. Benny Halaz struggled a lot in net to start the season, and they've actually kind of gone back to Charlie Glockner at times as their goaltender. So, they haven't, and Tanner Latch had just a tremendous start to the season. He ended up getting hurt, so that kind of took away a scoring threat from him. But, they just split with Michigan Tech. So I think that they're starting to figure some things out too. And, maybe they can make a run at home ice here in the second half of the season. So, and then also, I guess, Bowling Green maybe is a disappointment. Obviously, they had everything happen right before the start of the season, but people had them as a top 3 pick in the conference, and now they're sitting, 6th?
7th, but they're like tied with Northern Michigan, and
Sure.
They have 2 more games played, so I think that's probably like the tiebreaker. But yeah, I agree. Northern Michigan, I think pretty easily, based off the expectations that they had and a lot of people had for them, been the most disappointing team. And I guess you could look at it 2 ways. Is Bowling Green disappointing because they were supposed to be 3rd in the conference, or is it a surprise that they had before the Bemidji State series quite a good run of play, especially because the expectations kind of tampered themselves, and with the way that they started the year, being able to turn it around at any cost, I guess, is a little impressive. And I guess St. Thomas being as good as they are this early, with just in year 3 here, and we'll see if they stay up at the top of the standings. It certainly looks like something that they can maintain. But just being, one Beavers loss away from leading the conference into Christmas is impressive enough for the Tommies. I think that I at least have to give them a shout for that sort of, mantle. But like you said, Lake Superior State too, I kind of had them pegged down towards the bottom of the conference. So whether or not, they could fall to 7th place, just if everybody else played some games, they're still right there. And that, I think, is impressive, because I kind of thought they might be down a little bit closer to Ferris State than the rest of the pack.
Yeah. And so with the inclusion, not quite into the conference yet, of Augustana, but they're coming in. The Bemidji State Beavers are going to play them later on in the season. Augustana beat Denver at one point. So this is a team that's also going to come up. I mean, talk about St. Thomas. Once they get their new arena, they're going to be in a much different level recruiting wise. But Augustana is a team that's coming in. They got their brand new arena. They're going to be a team that's got some deep pockets and be willing to invest in that program. Have you been able to follow much of Augustana, Lucas, and what's kind of been your impression of them?
Yeah, I think they completely nailed their head coaching choice with Garrett Raboyne. I think he's been phenomenal in building that program. And, one thing that they had the advantage of over some, St. Thomas and some other teams is they were starting fresh. They had a whole year there of after the program was announced to kind of build that culture and get things rolling. And they've done a really good job in recruiting. They beat Denver in a shootout. And then actually the next night they went and beat Colorado College. So, they've had some impressive results. They're struggling a little bit now. And part of that's just kind of the schedule that they have to play. I think they've kind of, early on in the season there was like, are they, do they have a chance at a at-large bid? And I think that's all but gone now at this point. But Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a fun story for sure. They're a challenge to play against. If the other teams in the CCHA were actually concerned with getting an at-large bid to the tournament, like the games against Augustana would be bigger, but now it's kind of just, meaningless games, kind of in a sad way. Yeah, I'm excited to see what they do going forward, though, for sure. And yeah, that arena looks great. I know they just got the branding up on that recently, so that's a road trip we'll have to make when we play them in Sioux Falls next year.
Absolutely. I mean, early in the season, you're watching them and you're like, oh God, like this is gonna suck, man. St. Thomas is gonna be coming on and coming into their own, getting their identity in their new stadium or their new rink, and Augustana already looks like they've made the full jump up to D1 with ease, and it's just gonna be another powerhouse within the CCHA, and obviously it's a down year for the conference in and of itself, but I think that's what we're trying to build here is an identity of our own here at Bemidji. And I think, we've done a fairly good job ever since it's kind of transitioned over to the newer WCHA. Now, obviously not standing anymore. Which, by the way, did you guys hear, were you listening, Lucas, to the first intermission of the broadcast on Flow? I think it was I can't remember which night it was. I think it was Friday. They do the email the booth, right? And a Michigan Tech fan had emailed in a question because they must have been watching with Michigan Tech off this weekend. And they said something about why does it say WCHA on the boards? Do you guys know that it hasn't been the conference for like 3 years now? And they just completely slam dunked on them by saying, yes, well, unlike the state of Michigan, we play women's hockey here. And that is where the Bemidji State women's hockey team resides, is in the WCHA. I forgot to bring that up last week, which I was going to do on the air, but I just figured I'd throw that in there now since I brought up the WCHA. But yeah, we've been fairly.
That was such a great response by Brian.
So good.
I think we take for granted how good Schulze is and the call that those guys do a great job on those hockey calls.
They do. Yeah, I think Bemidji State's done a pretty good job of maintaining, top half play. There's been a couple years where, you're down in the conference and maybe you finish sixth or something, but I'm not a historian, but I can't remember anything lower than sixth, since like that 2015 era where I kind of stepped on campus there. Sixth, maybe seventh place in 2015. Because I know that wasn't a pretty season, but I think we've been a playoff team, the whole time and always fighting for home ice. We've been in championship games and won McNaughton Cups. So one of the more successful, at least regular season teams, and obviously winning a tournament game. So there's still the foundation there for Bemidji State to be successful. But Augustana coming in and looking good right away is obviously a spooky thing for any team that's watching them. And it's like, oh gosh, that's going to be one more team that we got to just focus up. And there's not many off weekends right now in the CCHA just because of how tight the standings are. Normally there's a couple teams at the bottom that I don't even want to call them off weekends because you still can't take them off because you almost like need to get all 6 points against those teams. But yeah, Augustana looks good and they've looked good from the jump. And, like Lucas said, they've kind of fallen flat a little bit lately, but even if they, went under 500 for the rest of the year, they're still going to consider this a very good success. I know they've had good local support, and they had good local support even before the program. But yeah, I think that they're going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, and
yeah.
No, go ahead, Lucas.
No, I was just going to, I mean, that's been a great story. Honestly, the biggest impact that I'm noticing from Augustana right now is that took away 2 conference games. So we sit here at 12 conference games played, and we're truly at the halfway point of the CCHA slate. There's only 24 conference games this year. So it feels weird to already be halfway through this season.
It's crazy to think about because I was doing the math in my head and all of a sudden I'm like, well, we're almost to January. And there's like basically January, February. And once you get into March, it's like ramping up for the CCHA playoffs. So it's crazy to think we're at this point in the season already. Lucas, anything else about men's hockey that you want to get off your chest while we got you here? Otherwise, we're going to talk a little women's hockey quick.
I think the only thing I would really like to mention is the season Kyle Loft is having is just beyond remarkable. I just didn't want to go through this, recapping the first half of the season and not mention him at all. 18 points in 18 games for a guy that hadn't scored more than like 8 points for Bemidji State in a season before. Just really awesome to see. Such a great dude, such a great captain, and yeah, just a remarkable first half of the season for him, and well on his way to being CCHA Defenseman of the Year. So
Yeah, I saw the Roboto had an article on him in the Pioneer. I think that came out last week, but he was talking a little bit about some of the stuff he's done and just the cool story behind it, which is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, he's been phenomenal. And I mean, I remember him making that decision to come back. And I apologize, Kyle. My initial thought was like, okay, cool. Welcome back, I guess. But he has been way better than anybody would have expected. 18 points, which is tied for lead on the team. He's got the most assists on the team with 13. And he just carries on the tradition, at least from last year, of the defenseman kind of sparking the way for the offense. And I'm glad that it's less so this year, because last year it kind of felt like we needed Smolik and Rosen to be involved in the offense to get any goal scoring going. And, now obviously it's less so with Loft and with Polkamp, with 9 points so far this season. So, but yeah, true. Kyle has been phenomenal, especially offensively for this team with 18 points. I cannot imagine what that blue line would look like for stretches of this season without him coming back.
Turning the page a little bit, going to women's hockey. Obviously, we kind of knew coming into this year it was going to be a struggle for them, and that they were kind of trying to pick up the pieces from the last couple of years and getting decimated in the portal, trying to rebuild everything from scratch. What have been your impressions of that rebuild effort for the women's hockey team?
Yeah, I've been really impressed by him this month. Splitting with Mankato and splitting with St. Thomas is a step forward, I think, for that program. You see a lot of the young girls, ladies, starting to pick up and get some points and playing really well. Talia Hendrickson, Kate Johnson, all of them have been playing really well. Eva Filipova getting her first shutout was awesome to see. It's still been a struggle this season for sure. They have a fun little holiday tournament coming up that I think they have a chance at, at least winning that first round game and seeing what happens in the second round. So, it looks like it's a step in the right direction. What they got to do now is keep developing these players, keep them on campus, and keep bringing in the talent that they're bringing in. I mean, you look at the group coming in next year. Again, you got some good players out of the state of Minnesota, bringing in a couple of European players that should help out right away, and still hitting those Canadian channels as well. So, compared to last year, I think this season's been, more enjoyable to watch them. They're not constantly, getting blown out by everyone that they play. And yeah, it's just good to see them now over this last month starting to pick up some wins and playing a lot better.
Yeah, I think even some of the uglier score lines that we see are not as ugly as they were last year. And that's a step in the right direction. And I think, like you said, one of the main keys is going to be keeping more players on campus this season. It's really difficult to build any sort of culture and identity within your program if you're losing 12 to 14 players a season. And, there's a difference between, North Dakota men's hockey that loses 10 guys to the NHL every year and, losing 12 players to the transfer portal or however many it was. You got to keep some more of those girls here or ladies and start building some sort of identity, because you're right. As bleak as a 2-15-1 record looks right now, I think that you are a little bit more happy with how this season's gone compared to last season, just because last season was it was so, I don't know, gut wrenching. Like it just felt worse every game. You go into the weekend, you're thinking, all right, let's see what we can do, and then you lose by 20 goals combined. And this year it's 15 instead of 20. And so hopefully we can just keep narrowing that gap, because honestly, we're not too far removed from Bemidji State being a middle of the conference team, in the WCHA, at least, within the last 7-8 years of that. But we'll see if we can build back towards that sort of spot. And I think that, like you said, this coming weekend here, the Battle of the Berg, it's going to be a good opportunity. You're playing some new opponents, go out there and play with confidence and see what happens.
Yeah, it's always fun on these holiday tournaments when you see the scheduling and how the host team always tries to schedule the perceived easiest opponent for their first round matchup. And you can kind of tell that Robert Morris did that with this tournament with Colgate and Maine playing each other in the other round. So Colgate and Maine are both, pretty good programs, Colgate especially. But that game against Robert Morris certainly feels winnable. And that's just kind of a good experience for them going out to Pittsburgh and playing in that over the New Year's.
With the women's hockey team, I know one of the storylines kind of spin with the team has been the War Road line. For those who don't know, just what's a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the War Road line is two freshmen, Kate Johnson, Talia Hendrickson, and then her sister Genevieve, all from War Road, Minnesota. And yeah, this is really cool to see them developing that chemistry, playing together. And it just formed maybe a couple of weekends ago or maybe a month or so ago now that they really put them all together. So it's been good to see them producing and starting to score some goals. And it just kind of a cool story too, with the two sisters playing together and teammates from high school too. So
I think that's one of my favorite little parts about hockey. Just a little thing, but just the lines and how creative you can get. I know the Gophers earlier this season were using a Lucky Sevens line or something like that with Brody Lamb, Rhett Pitlick, and Aaron Huglin, who all have the last number 7 on their jersey. And even with some Beaver examples, you got the Fitzgerald triplets that at one point were all playing on the same line, and brothers Owen and Lucas Sillinger. That sort of thing always just is fun to watch when you get that chemistry on the same line.
So anything else, Lucas, with women's hockey? I mean, what are your expectations for them for the rest of the season, other than obviously improve and kind of try and pick up little things? But what areas, is there any specific areas, or is it any specific player you want to see improvement on? Or is it just kind of, try and improve overall?
Yeah, I can't really pick out a specific player, I don't think. The blue line, there's a lot of freshmen in that defense room right now, and I think they have improved a lot throughout the season, but just again continuing to see their development will be awesome. You still play St. Thomas and Minnesota State here coming up the second half of the season. How awesome would it be to get a sweep this year? I think you have opportunities there against those two teams to do that for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think that just keep building off of what you've been doing earlier this season, and those 2 weekends are going to be especially important. And then, God forbid, if you can take anything off of any of these other teams in Ohio State, Wisconsin, Minnesota, St. Cloud State, Minnesota Duluth, I think the later 2 being more achievable than the first 3 that I named. But any overtime, anything, as a team sort of success, but just keep improving. And yeah, those 2 weekends, try to get some wins and hopefully you finish 7th in the conference this year. I think I've said that a couple times. Maybe go up 1 spot from where you were at last year, and at least have something to build on in terms of a team success category.
So, Lucas, anything else with women's hockey that you want to let us know about? Otherwise, I think we've pretty much got all the questions, unless there's something you want to add, Ian. What else do you want to add about women's hockey before we let you get out of here?
Good luck. It's going to be a gauntlet. That's the WCHA. We talk about it every year. It's a tough conference, with Ohio State, Wisconsin, and now St. Cloud State finding their footing. And they used to be a team that was a more winnable series or game. Minnesota Duluth has definitely come on in the last couple of years. It is not easy playing in this conference. And so, good luck in the second half. Definitely take this tournament seriously, and hopefully you come out of it with anything at all.
All right. Well, Lucas, we appreciate you hopping on the podcast and giving us your time again. One more time before we let you get out of here, why don't you just tell everybody where they can find you at and the best ways to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can find me. You can read my blog on beaverterritory.substack.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Beaver Territory and on Facebook.
Lucas of Beaver Territory, joining us on the Beaver Banter podcast. Great to talk with you again, Lucas. We're going to have you on later in the season, I'm sure, and we're going to talk about some things. And hopefully, they're still at the top of the CCHA standings for the men's team as we get there. So appreciate your time, Lucas. Have a happy New Year, and hopefully, we got some better hockey to talk about.
Awesome. Can't wait. Thanks, guys.
It's been the Beaver Banter podcast. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also listen and watch our streams on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook as well. We'll see you guys in 2024.